Julie, welcome. It's so great to have you.
Hi, Stephanie. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, I absolutely want to talk about your new book, which I'm very excited to receive and read when it comes out. But before we jump into that, I would really love, I'm sure a lot of people listening follow you online, your
Mhm.
account, and appreciate your content as much as I do. Um, Something that I really value in your work is that you do such a great job at articulating the fears and the vulnerabilities that sit underneath the attachment styles and the behaviors that we see outwardly, which it's easy to be critical of or
Mhm.
judgmental of some of the ways that these fears and vulnerabilities manifest outwardly,
Sure.
and particularly when we're in relationship with someone and we're on either side of that.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe you could
So
share
hard.
Maybe you could share for people. I mean, I think most people listening will be familiar with each of the attachment styles,
Mhm.
but kind of going a layer deeper
Mhm.
and sharing, like, what are some of those deeper fears, which oftentimes I think one of the beauties of your content is some of the things you put words to are things that people might not necessarily be consciously aware of
Very much
in
so.
terms
Yeah.
of their own, what is driving their behavior. So maybe you could just give a little bit of a feel for what sits underneath a lot of those behaviors for each of the insecure attachment
Mhm.
styles.
Well, one thing that comes to mind is when we talk about anxious attachment, most people are kind of familiar with the idea that anxious attachment comes from this fear of abandonment. And when we hear the word abandonment, our minds just sort of go right to physical abandonment, right? Which can be a real fear for someone with an anxious attachment, just that physical distance, and not having lots of contact with their partner through the phone or through text or however, because that physical proximity helps them feel safe. Like if you're right there in front of me, I have this sense of safety in my body that you're not gone, right? But there are also a lot of people with anxious attachment who actually don't really mind not being physically with their partner all the time. And what they actually fear is emotional abandonment, which is probably a bigger piece of the puzzle for a lot of people, which is, emotional abandonment is feeling emotionally validated, getting messages that your emotions are too much or your emotions are unreasonable or your emotions are illogical or your emotions don't matter to me, which is huge.
Yeah.
So, what's really going to, get someone with an anxious attachment triggered is less, well, I don't want to say less. For some people, we're going to see all of these posts about if they don't text back, things like that, right? But there's this other piece of it where you hear from your partner, you're just making things up, or you know what, you need to deal with your feelings on your own,
Yeah.
or you're seeing it the wrong, all wrong,
Yeah.
or you're just being dramatic. And so that's going to really trigger the heart of someone with an anxious attachment uh, profoundly because of
Yeah.
growing up in environments where those were the repeated messages. And that
Yeah.
is emotional abandonment. And if you look at things like borderline personality disorder, which is this really extreme version of, what I consider attachment insecurity, uh, the only thing that's really common in studies to the childhood environment of people who develop borderline personality disorder, what would you think it would be? Serious abuse, something like this, but it's emotional invalidation. Just an
Mm.
environment of emotional invalidation is enough to create major
Yeah.
problems.
Yeah. I love that you talk about emotional abandonment. It's something that I've spoken to before. And I think that,
Mhm,
I can relate to it. Like I lean more anxious and having that fear of like, are you going to be there when I need you, even though you're physically here? This sense
mhm,
of, am I going to be left alone with these big feelings, right?
mhm.
And I think that
So
can be
true.
really terrifying. And
It really
when we
can.
see
Yeah.
expressions of that various cycles in anxious avoidant dynamics where you might have someone on the other side who goes the other way and withdraws or pulls away or becomes very defensive,
Mhm.
then having that sense of, I'm scrambling to try and get engagement from you. And
Mhm.
even in this moment when my emotions are getting really big and I'm visibly distressed, for you to still be kind of denying me what I need, that can feel like fuel on the fire, right? It's like, it's no
Right.
secret that I need you in this moment. So surely if you loved me, you would be responding to me the way I want you to respond. And I think,
Mhm.
as you say, that can be really like viscerally terrifying, distressing for someone with more anxious attachment.
Definitely, and then we have this other side, which is the person who's not showing up, right? And so what does it look like? It looks like they don't care. They're disengaged. It's irrelevant. I'm irrelevant to them. But really what's happening is they're getting overwhelmed with, I don't know what to do. I never learned how to help myself in these emotionally hard places. So I really don't know how to help a partner. And the way that I did learn to help myself was to shove my feelings away, just make them go away, or go into this fix it place in my brain. And so what I know to do to help you is what I've learned to do to help me. And
Yeah.
you know, really not recognizing the impact of, well, you should just see it differently, or, let's just do whatever I have to do to make these big emotions go away that I don't know how to deal with. And
Yeah.
that eventually they get overwhelmed to the point that none of my strategies are working here, which doesn't
Yeah.
make sense because they work with me.
Everything I say or don't
So
say makes this worse, right?
yes, exactly,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. So then they shut
Yeah.
down, and it's like, where does this start, a chicken or the egg? It doesn't start anywhere. It just is.
Yeah.
I mean, as
Yeah.
far
And
as the way they're interacting with each other.
yeah, and it's something that that I take very seriously in my work is not kind of creating a hierarchy of these different
Mhm.
expressions and not, I think, particularly avoidant attachment gets a really bad rap
It really
in a
does, yeah.
lot of online content, and it's something that
Mhm.
I'm really quite passionate about balancing that and
Mhm.
giving people more kind of inroads into understanding that in a compassionate way and recognizing,
Yeah.
everything that you just articulated makes perfect sense, right?
Mhm.
In the environment in which it sprung from,
It
that's
really
a really
is.
adaptive response. Like,
And
oh,
and
I'm not,
it really is empowering, I think, for somewhere along the line, I'm not exactly sure where, but anxious partners got this idea that, you know, they have these needs, the avoidance can't show up for these needs, and so it must be the avoidance that's the problem. But how disempowering is that?
yeah,
Right? To think that you really can't do anything, that you're just kind of a victim to what, this other person is doing. So I love that you said you balance this out, because it's so
yeah.
important. Because when anxious
Mm,
partners really start to learn, there's a lot of work they can be doing to shift
mm.
the environment. It's a much, I think, a much more empowering message.
I agree. I think that uh, as much as it might be a hard pill to swallow for people to recognize their
Mhm.
part in the dynamic and what they need to take responsibility for, I think that it's ultimately a much more empowering place to be than kind
Mhm.
of throwing your hands up and saying, "Well, you just don't meet my needs," or "You always do
Mhm.
this," or "I'm doing all the
Yeah.
work and you're the
Yeah.
roadblock." And I think coupled with the tendency for anxious folks to persist in light of all of those,
Mhm.
criticisms or judgments. It's not like they're reaching a decision of this isn't working for me and walking away. It's like this isn't working for me, but I'm going to sit here and protest about it.
Exactly. I'm gonna keep
Yeah.
watering the plant with gasoline.
Yeah, exactly. And then feeling really frustrated and overwhelmed
Mhm.
and,
And
why does this
exhausted,
keep
because it
happening to
confuses
me?
you to
Yeah.
water the plant with gasoline.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe we can pivot to talking about your book, Secure Love, which is probably by the time this episode comes out, will be out in the world. So anyone listening, please go ahead and order a copy if you haven't already. Tell us about the book. What's kind of the premise? What do you take people through?
Well, I wrote it, For a lot of different reasons, and every time I'm interviewed, I give another a different reason, whatever comes to mind, but, I have seen a lot of success in doing the type of work that I do with couples, working with attachment theory in my private practice, and when I started my Instagram account, which is where I started putting out information, where I was starting from is, look, there are a lot of people out there who just don't have access to couples therapy and don't have access to, quality couples therapy. And how can I kind of help people that are in that position in the best way possible through, social media platform, and kind of tie attachment theory all together. Like, let's put it into context. How is, you have an anxious attachment, you get your partner has an avoidant attachment. Now what, how does it show up between the two of you? And more importantly, how is it creating these negative communication cycles, which is basically the
Mhm.
anxious attachment partner being anxious and the avoidant attachment partner being avoidant. And now they're reinforcing all of these insecurities.
Mhm.
They're not, they're speaking in a way that can go from kind of a normal conversation into a big fight, or, and they're not getting problem solved. Those kinds of negative cycles block actual resolution to our talk about finances or our talk about parenting or sex or politics or whatever it is. And in the process, they're also hurting each other emotionally and reinforcing the already insecure attachment. So I'm kind of leading with, hey, here's attachment theory. Here's a very detailed description of anxious attachment, the childhood environment, how it looks in adulthood. Here's how it shows up in these negative cycles. Here's what you can do to interrupt them when they happen. Here's what you can do to prevent them. Here's what you can do to repair them.
Mhm.
And then, just lots of practical skills, lots of actual words, scripts.
Mhm.
If you don't have the words and you haven't learned these words yet, it's just a concept, and it can be really hard for people to put concepts into actions, especially in these, moments when they're kind of like on the spot and you got to say it the right way, or and then, some couples are blocked by attachment injuries, which is something I have to work with in my practice too, which is kind of like these added layers of attachment wounds, major breaches of trust, moments when
Yeah.
you really needed your partner to show up for you and they weren't there. And a lot of times these old wounds are blocking their ability to even put new practices into place, put new communication into place, because there's all this resentment and mistrust built up. So then I'm going to kind of say, hey, here are some ideas. Here are the way that healing conversations go. Here's what a healing conversation looks like. Now that you kind of learn to do that outside of these negative cycles, let's see if we can start healing some of this, which is only going to make the work easier. Then just goes into just different other considerations like mental illness, sex, substance abuse, anything that's kind of layers to relationships that are more
Mhm.
than just the standard fighting about money. And then I have a whole chapter of scripts. Just, you need to bring up a hard topic to your partner. Here's some things to say. Your partner doesn't want to go to therapy. Here are some things to say. And just, multiple examples to give people, the words. And it's not just the words, we need to make words our own, but I also break down the phrases into elements, which is, this is why I validated at the beginning of this sentence. This is why I ended it in this way. So
Mm.
if you're not wanting to use my words, and sometimes they aren't even my words, they're just as neutral as I can be for people who are reading the book that all speak from, in different ways, different cultures. It's just like, well, let's just help you integrate the elements here.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure that's immensely helpful for people who, as you say, just don't have that reference point. They've never, maybe they grew up in a family system where things weren't talked about or they weren't talked about in a
Mhm.
productive way. And you've just not had that relational environment,
So
either
true.
directly or you've never had it modeled. So I think that
Exactly. Yep.
having those scripts can be so helpful. Something that comes up for me as you say that is I hear from a lot of people with more anxious patterns who very much want the scripts. And something
Mhm.
that I'm always minded to add in as a caveat is,
Mhm.
here's a script, and you kind of have to surrender a little to the messiness of being in relationship.
Definitely.
And I
Yeah.
think that there can be this sense of, if I say the perfect thing in the perfect way, then I'll
Yes.
get the outcome that I
Yeah.
want. And
Yeah.
if I do my part, then you have to do
Yeah.
your part. You have to respond in the way that I want you to. And if you don't,
Absolutely.
then I'll go straight back into, well, you're the problem.
Right.
Is that
Right.
something that
And
you
I
said?
do I do address this pretty extensively in the book, which is this change really does need to come from your heart. If it's coming from a
Yeah.
place of, "Well, I'm only doing this because I really wanna, control what you're going to do," then it's really
Yeah.
not change at all. So we really have to shift that heart place, which is why I put the scripts at the end of the book, not the beginning of the book.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it is. It's funny. It can almost be like a covert extension of the cycle when,
It is,
you know,
it is. That
it's
perfectly
like,
worded. Yes.
yeah,
It really is.
rather than shifting it, there can be ways that that cycle can come back in. And I think that that is a really challenging edge for people.
Mhm,
Something that I still, notice come up and I have to keep tabs on is that story of like one person trying, extending the olive
mhm,
branch, and then if they still get some sort of defensiveness or their partner doesn't
mhm,
immediately, become a different person and respond totally
mhm.
differently, then it can spiral back.
So
What would
true.
you say to people in that, like, kind of realistic expectations around how
Mhm.
this change happens?
Well, I do address this is another topic I do address extensively in the book, which is, we're looking at the big picture here. We're looking for the end. This is a long game. When you start this work, there really are no guarantees that you can put the right term coin into the vending machine and push the button and you're going to get the bag of chips, right? We have to look at it. The mindset has to be one. I really want to be the person I wanna be in the world, right? I want to be a person who can communicate myself, in the healthiest way possible, can kind
Mm,
of regulate my emotions before I deliver my messages, and if you look at it that way, you can't lose, right? Because every time you try something new that's, going to help you grow as a person, that's a win, even if your partner doesn't respond in the exact way that you would like. Now, of course, we all really need and want for the relationship to be close, for our partner to be able to respond openly and positively to our shifts, but in most cases, that's not going to happen right away. It's a matter
mm,
of environmental shift, second order change. So, first order change is I'm just going to start delivering my messages in a new way. Second order change is when the environment starts to become new. And you have to
mm,
do a lot of consistent, repetitive first order change before second order change starts to become a natural way of being for both partners. And, most of the couples out there that are working, they aren't necessarily working parallel to each other, growing at the exact same rate.
mm.
So your job as a partner isn't to kind of make your partner grow. You
Yeah.
want your partner to grow. You crave your partner's growth. You need your partner's growth for closeness in the relationship. But your real job is to do your part to clean up the environment.
Mm. Yeah.
And when we have clean environments, and if one partner can start kind of getting the ball rolling on that process and putting emotional safety into the relationship, even when the other partner isn't able to right then, that, people are their best selves when they feel safe. People start to
Mm,
reflect when they feel safe. So if your partner's going, I refuse to go to couples therapy, couples therapy is for people who are about to get divorced. The typical anxious response to that is what? You don't care about the relationship. I'm the only one doing the work here, right? Well,
mhm,
that's not really safe because it's not really taking into account the other partner's very legitimate concerns. If the
mm,
other partner has this idea that if we go to couples therapy, we're going to end up getting divorced because I have numerous examples of people in my life who are divorced, who ended, who went to couples therapy. So my nervous system is kind of wired around the idea that this isn't safe. that needs to be held and validated, right?
Yeah.
Yes, the ultimate goal is to get the help. I want that for the couple as much as the anxious partner, but that avoidant partner really needs space to hear, "You know what? That makes sense to me." It really does. I mean, I believe that we should go to couples therapy. We're in a bad spot. We can't seem to get out of it on our own. But at the same time, if you have seen multiple people go to couples therapy and end up getting divorced, of course you don't wanna go down that road. That's a threat to
Mhm.
you, and I really do get
Yeah.
that. And then
Yeah.
maybe some space later to kind of insert your opinion. That is going to lead that avoidant partner into there's a much better chance it's gonna lead them into self-reflection more than
Mm.
just pushing their needs to the side. And then what do
Mm.
people do? They usually double down.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think
That's
that,
a lot. That was a
no,
lot,
but I
sorry.
no, I think that no, it's really important, and it's something that I was gonna ask you about, like, this idea of, almost invariably, there's one partner who's more, proactive and wants to do the
Mhm,
work and has certain meanings associated with that. And I think for more
mhm,
anxious people, it's like, because I care about our relationship, it's very important to get ahead of all of the problems. It'd be,
mhm,
plugging all of even the tiniest little leaky hole in the boat. Let's talk about it and, make a
mhm. Let's
plan and do the
process
all
there.
the
Yeah.
time, right? Process. For more avoidant partners, like doing the work can have a very different meaning and association, and it can
Mhm,
feel like there's always something wrong, right? There's
mhm,
always something
mhm.
wrong, and you're always unhappy with me, and we, deal with that thing, and there's another thing, and
Yes,
that
yeah.
can feel really, that can kind of chip away at their, sense of self, their sense of like, am I doing a good job as your partner?
So true.
And
Yeah.
when there's just really different conceptions of like what it means to do this kind of work in a relationship, what it means about you as individuals, what it means about your connection,
Mhm,
then I think when we project what it means for us onto them and go, well, it's important to me to do this work because I care about our relationship so much, and you don't want to do it, so you mustn't care about our relationship,
it can be
then we
so
cause
easy to make
ourselves a lot of
mhm,
pain, right?
yes, yeah.
Whereas I think when we can, and it's so much easier said than done in those moments of, hurt, and when we're so genuinely invested in a solution that we believe is the right one, but validating someone's resistance or
Mhm,
defensiveness and getting curious about it and going, okay,
mhm,
what must this be about for you? Like, what might be underneath your resistance? And how can
mhm.
I feel into that in a way that I can try and understand it rather than just making
Sure.
you wrong for it? Because I think, as you say, it's like, if I make you wrong for it, is that going to open you or close you? It's going to close you. And that's going to get me,
Yes.
again, like, we don't want to be always acting from a place of like, getting what we want from someone. But I think you can also look at that and go, what's the natural consequence of me, blaming and shaming you for the way that you genuinely feel about this thing that's a
Mhm,
really big issue? I think someone doubling down, as you say, and digging their heels in, that's a really understandable natural consequence of
it really
feeling like
is.
you're under attack. And
Yeah.
I can also imagine, you as a couples therapist, that a lot of people with more avoidant patterns would have this fear of like, you're going to kind of drag me to the principal's office and like sit me
Absolutely.
down and
That is
have
yes,
someone just like bolster your side of the argument. So I'm going to be under attack on
yes.
multiple fronts.
That's that is so true, and I could have used that as an example, and I definitely use that in the book too, which is their avoidant partners or anybody who doesn't wanna go to therapy, they have really good reasons, for not
Yeah.
wanting to go. It doesn't mean at the end of the day, sometimes the conversation at some point might need to get to, "Look, this relationship is in a really bad spot, it's not working for me, and we're either gonna have to go or I don't know what," but that kinda setting a little bit more of a firmer boundary around it. But we need to just lead with just figuring out and validating your perspective because it makes sense on some level. Even if
Mhm.
it's I don't agree, I don't think that's, I don't agree with your opinion. The emotions behind that opinion are always valid, and to your point, when you're approaching it in that way, you are actually working on the relationship.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that being able to have that conversation and say, you know, I understand why this might feel a certain way for you. Um, for me, like I feel like I think I've seen you reference this before and I talk about it as well. It's like shifting into that. This is a problem that we are facing together, right?
Mhm.
The things that exist in our relationship um, feel bigger than our ability to solve them at the moment.
Mhm.
And clearly, like what we're doing isn't working, and it's
Mhm.
tiring and it's exhausting. And speaking to some of those, what are likely to be shared experiences of the problem. You
Mhm.
know, this really sucks. I hate feeling disconnected from you all the time. I hate feeling
Mhm.
like we're always at each other's throats,
Mhm.
and I just don't know what to do anymore
Yeah, we
because
need
it
to get some
feels like the
help.
things we're trying aren't working. And I think
Mhm.
that shifting into that immediately just brings the temperature down a bit.
It really does. It really does. It opens, like you said, opens people up. And, I'm
Mm.
in the business of behavior change, but I'm in the business of getting to that behavior change with open hearts.
Mm. Yeah.
And that comes from communicating in a healthy way. There's no way
Mm.
around it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it just, as you say, it's about creating safety, and I think we have to
Mhm.
really have that at front of mind. You know, is
Mhm.
it, at all points in relationship, like, is the thing that I'm about to do, all of my default modes of being in relationship, is
Mhm.
that likely to contribute to or detract from the safety of the person that I'm in relationship with or the broader
Mhm.
environment and culture of our relationship? And I think when we ask ourselves that and kind of pause and check in, so many of the things that we do on autopilot, if we have more insecure patterns, wouldn't pass that
Yeah,
test. They're about, our safety, but from a very survival driven place that's probably not well suited to the kind of relationship that we really desire and are trying to build.
absolutely. Yes. It's actually blocking that relationship that you're longing for.
Yeah. So, something that I'm curious about is like, how much of this work do you think, in terms of insecure attachment and repairing and moving towards a more secure relationship, is that work that you think people can do solely in a relational context, or is it, doing your own work and doing it relationally? Is it sort
Mhm.
of just, whatever presents itself to you is an opportunity to do that work?
I think so. I think that you do, uh, probably the most effective way to look at it is every interaction with a person. It doesn't really
Mm,
matter, if it's the clerk at the market or your partner. Every interaction has the potential to trigger you,
mm,
right? And it's your triggers that's where the work lies, is when you're triggered.
mm,
And ultimately, the work is when you're triggered, what are you gonna do from that point? Are you gonna
mm,
do something? Are you gonna snap at the clerk at the market and then feel bad about yourself for the rest of the day? Are you gonna
mm,
snap at the clerk in the market and then forgive yourself and help
mm,
yourself make sense of that and think about what you may have done differently? Are you
mm,
gonna you take that moment when the clerk snaps at you and step inside and take a moment to go, what's going on with me? Okay, I'm feeling kind of,
mm,
disrespected right now, but
mm,
I'm going to choose to not show up in a way that I don't want to be in the world. And so, if we just take that into the relationship, I mean, every interaction gives you the opportunity to grow. Every interaction,
mm,
but you don't need to be in a romantic relationship to examine your triggers. We have relationships with family members, we have relationships with friends. I do think it's important to have someone in your life that's a secure attachment for you, whether that's a
mm,
therapist or someone that you meet at, an Al-Anon group, or a friend who is dependable and can be there for you in kind of a good enough way. When we get that dependability and that support, that emotional support, it's co-regulating to our nervous systems, and it does help
mm.
us grow as a person, right? But I think it's like you said, it's just you're taking every opportunity
Yeah,
to grow and to
yeah.
start doing things differently with your feelings.
Yeah, and a lot of it is really kind of mundane and unglamorous, right? I think that
So true.
people
Yeah.
expect, like, healing to be this big dramatic moment of
It's
epiphany.
not. Yeah, it's
But as you
not.
say, it's just, like, chipping away. It's like
It really is.
putting a coin in the
Yeah.
jar a day at a time.
It is. I mean, I
And
go on walks with my dog and I start noticing these feelings of like, I just want this, normally I love walking, but sometimes I'll think, I just want to get all this stuff done. I wish this walk was over. And that's an opportunity for me to check in and say, what's going on right now? That this sense of urgency is getting in my way of enjoying this walk, enjoying this time out here and being present in nature. And that can help me sort of reground myself. And now the walk becomes this more pleasurable experience instead of just getting in the way of my compulsive need to work. So, how does that show up in my relationship? Well, I have just taken that moment to practice getting into my body, finding that sense of urgency that kind of shows up in my chest, paying attention to that, soothing it, and then kind of being able to go into a different place in my heart where I'm more present. So the next time my husband triggers me, I have had that practice going into my body like that. And now, because I've practiced that in these other parts of life, it's easier for me to step back and go, all right, what's going on? What about what he said is kind of stirring me up inside? And how can I kinda ground myself and get more present and show up in the healthiest way possible that's not gonna lead us down this rabbit hole of a negative cycle.
yeah. Yeah, I love that you share that. I think having that capacity to pause, and it is such a practice just to pause and go,
Mhm,
huh, how interesting that this thing is
mhm,
stirring this response in me. And I think as
mhm,
soon as we do that, we sort of rise above it and we, create that distance that allows us to observe it and then maybe
mhm.
gently question it. And it just feels less all consuming and true. And I think
Right,
that when it
right.
feels less all consuming and true, then we're not so propelled to just act from that place. Which
Absolutely
so
right.
often, as you say, is this kind of heightened, dysregulated place of, I have to do something, or something
Yeah.
dissociative, but it's just like I lose the ability to kind of bring myself back when I can't see what's happening. And so whether it's like, walking the dog or waking up in the morning and noticing some anxiety, being able to turn towards that
Mhm,
with a level of like, huh, interesting, I'm feeling anxious today. What might that be about for me? And what do I need?
mhm,
How can I support myself to feel a little bit more grounded or a little safer in my body or whatever it might be? Um, I think that
and
process
it's
is
such a
so repairing in our own self relationship, right? It's like, oh, I can tend to myself in those uncomfortable moments or those big
right.
moments, and that
Even
is
when
huge.
what's going on around me might not be perfect, I'm still able to stay with myself.
Hmm.
And I think,
Yeah.
this is important too, and you kinda touched on this earlier, which is these are subtle shifts, right? My walk isn't going from, "Oh my gosh, I just wanna get home," to, "Oh, zen, this is such a glorious walk." It's just
Yeah.
going into this step of a little bit more present.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people do this work and they kinda expect to go from one extreme to the other, and we're really not, we're just trying to feel better whatever better looks like.
Yeah. And
It
I think
isn't this
relating.
glamorous big shift. Sometimes it's just a little more
You are now
subtle.
healed.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's true. Such a big part of it is like changing the way we relate to ourselves and our feelings as well.
Mhm.
I work mostly with anxiously attached people, and it's like, on the other side of this work, does that mean I won't experience anxiety anymore in my
Mhm.
relationships? It's like,
No.
um, very sadly, no, that's a human thing. But I think just like having a level of, openness to the full spectrum of experience and the messiness of being human and being in relationships. And
Mhm.
I think really critically, like trusting in our capacity to hold ourselves through that and to navigate whatever that might look like, rather than fearing the big emotions because we don't trust ourselves to experience them. And we think, oh no, if that happens,
Right.
I won't be okay. And so I have to just frantically try and prevent any of
Oh,
those
so true.
things
So, so true.
surprised me.
And then it's just such an exhausting way to live,
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely, and
to
it's kind of
constantly
ironically, your whole life becomes about the thing you don't want to happen, right?
it
It
really
takes up so
does,
much
right.
bandwidth.
It
Um,
does, and then you've
yeah,
created the self-fulfilling prophecy,
yeah,
um, because you're having a hard time trusting your future self to handle when things
yeah,
don't go well.
yeah.
And if
And I
we
think
can do
that there
nothing
is
else in our line of work, it's helping people develop that trust, you know, I
yeah,
can learn to handle my own feelings.
yeah, yeah, and just kind of surrendering to the uncertainty of it all, right?
Mhm.
Even secure, healthy relationships are gonna have hard times and they're gonna have bumps in the road. And I
So
think having
true.
this,
Yeah.
very idealistic perception of, if I can again like control for all of these things and I'm going to eliminate, like totally de-risk my relationship to the point where I won't have to ever feel hurt or disappointed or any of those things. I won't ever have trust broken. And like
Mhm.
that's the bar that we're setting, I think again is unrealistic and
It
is
really
kind of setting
is, and
ourselves
it
up to
you know,
fail.
we are, and, the growth lies in the ruptures, right?
Mm,
So if we I would never want couples to not have ruptures, because that's how they learn to kinda take it to that next step. Maybe
mm,
this is a topic that we haven't been addressing, and so now it's kinda overwhelming our coping mechanisms, and we kinda, got lost in that negative cycle, not being our best selves. Well, coming back together in that repair process opens up space for the vulnerability that was tapped into that might be surrounding this hard topic, deeper layers of our fears and who we are, and it provides opportunity to bond and become stronger.
mm. Yeah,
And that,
absolutely.
I see when I see couples, I see this, these patterns, and they're going along and their relationship is getting better, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they're feeling so confident, and out of nowhere, they have this big fight. And almost always, once we work through whatever that big fight was, there's a big growth spurt.
Mm, yeah. I think it's also like giving ourselves a lot of grace and not
Mhm.
treating that fight as like, oh, it's a major regression in the trajectory
Mhm.
that we've been on. I think recognizing the absolute inevitability of these ruptures, and kind of working that into our expectation
Mhm.
of what it means to be in relationship with someone because
Mhm.
it's messy, right? It's like two
It
people
does.
coming together with all of their own stuff and,
Yes. And it's
kind of two lives and we're trying to build something together. Like, of course, we're going to stumble. Of course.
of
But like,
course
who's
we
the
are.
person I want to stumble with and get up with and kind of do that
Yeah.
messy work of rebuilding? I think that's really the much healthier mindset around it
It
rather
really
than,
is. It's so much more realistic, and the expectations are more appropriate, and it's like, as long as we don't want that messiness to take over the relationship and define the climate. There's so
mm,
much value in that messiness, so much
yeah,
value. I
yeah,
mean, a lot of the
absolutely.
partners that I see are, some of them are actually struggling, not so much because they grew up in a high conflict household, but because they grew up in a no conflict household. So now
Yeah,
they get into a relationship with in a more of a norm, which is, hey, we don't see eye to eye about everything. And so what they experienced growing up was that usually it was like one partner who was making all the decisions, and the reason that there
yeah,
wasn't conflict is because one partner had all the power in the relationship, or they
yeah,
switched power, but still somehow this couple, these parents managed to just not have overt
yeah,
conflict. So what happens to someone who doesn't experience their own parents having rupture and repair?
yeah.
Then now they think that these ruptures that are now happening in my relationship, there must be something wrong. They have very
Mm,
little skills to actually repair the situation. So we do want some adversity.
yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really important point. It's something I can relate to. In my family, there wasn't a lot of like loud
Mhm.
conflict fighting, but I was definitely acutely aware of when there was tension.
Sure, and
um,
that can be really hard, yeah.
yeah, and I think that that then for me has, I developed in that environment where I'm now very sensitive to it, energetic shifts in a
Mhm,
dynamic and can experience those. And I've had to do a lot of work around it. Like, experience those as really threatening and as some precursor to something very bad,
mhm, mhm,
something that's really going to rock the boat and that feels, quite threatening to my system. And so having to kind of disentangle all of that,
mhm,
body memory that says like, oh, this is bad,
mhm,
and you need to kind of get on the front foot and uh, you know, figure out what the problem is and stop
mhm.
it before it becomes something bigger. There's a
Oh,
lot
like,
of
these
really,
it just as you talk, I'm just feeling that anxiety in
yeah,
my system when you're in those situations and you know there's this tension, but it's not being talked
yeah,
about, and it's that can
yeah,
be God, I mean, sometimes that can feel worse than actually hearing people fight.
absolutely. And I think it does create that hypervigilance to like, there's something, the elephant in the room, and it's something that's still
Mhm,
now really I have such a strong reaction to is like there's a thing that's being avoided. There's a conversation that's being avoided or an issue that's being avoided. And I have such a visceral reaction to that perception, because it has
yeah.
all of the weight of that history behind it.
Well,
So
what's coming to mind, it's interesting if you I'm sure you're familiar with The Strange Situation, the
yeah.
original. I don't know if you remember this piece, but, you know, the children who were labeled as anxious attachment were crying, and they were kind of inconsolable when they got triggered, and, the mom was kinda anxiously trying to calm them down, but it took an extended period of time compared to the babies with secure attachment. The avoidant children, on the other hand, were just blank. They didn't show much emotion at all. They weren't showing any signs of distress. They just kept playing with the toys. But it was the avoidant children who were more physiologically aroused,
Yeah.
even more so than the anxious children. So there is something to be said for, at least with anxious attachment, that energy is somewhat getting expelled. Not
Yeah.
that, it's all got its downsides in different ways, but I'm just thinking
Yeah.
of you sitting there as a child and know you didn't grow up in this high conflict home, but yet
Yeah.
you still have this sense of anxiety, and it
Yeah.
probably took you a while in your life, I'm guessing, to recognize, "Hey, that was painful too."
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I think having that, um, being able to really honestly look at, the environments that we grew up in, not in a way that's trying to like lay blame or create,
Mhm.
a trauma that wasn't there, but to go, oh, okay, yeah, that had an impact. That kind of makes
Yeah,
sense. That this grew
absolutely.
from
Yeah.
that, and that I adapted in that way, and that made a lot of sense in that environment. But maybe that's not serving me
Mhm.
well in this new environment that I'm trying to create. I
Yeah.
think that finding that middle road is really valuable in doing this work and having more context for ourselves and the
Mhm.
way that we show up in relationships.
Yeah, so true. I love how you said, you're not looking for problems, but you are
Yeah.
looking at the problems that might still be alive today. And I say this in the book too. It's like, look, I'm not trying to take away your happy childhood memories or your love for your parents,
Mm,
at all. All of it can be true.
mm,
You can look at your child and say, "Hey, I was basically a happy kid. I felt loved, I felt supported, and here are some things that maybe didn't go well that are still kind of getting in my way in this relationship." And some people
yeah,
have the other experience where they're like, "No, it was absolutely awful. I felt horrible." All of it
yeah,
can be true. There's
yeah.
no one thing that we can say, you have to have this set of trauma in order to be suffering now.
Mm, yeah. That provides a nice segue. I was gonna finish by asking you a very self-interested question because I know that do you have 5 kids? 6 kids?
6. 6
Six
kids, yeah.
kids. I'm 6 months pregnant with my first. And
Oh,
so
congratulations. It's so
I'm very
exciting.
curious. It is very exciting. I'm very curious to ask you, coming from all of this work, and obviously with having 6 kids, what would you say is kind of attachment How has doing this work, I suppose, influenced the way that you have approached being a parent?
Oh, well, it dramatically influenced the way that I am a parent. I mean, just dramatically. I mean, I started off in a really bad foot. This information wasn't available to me. I was not in the field at the time. I did not grow up in a home with um, much positive modeling and lots of stuff there. So when I had my first son, I was just dead set on figuring it all out. But I was reading all these parenting books, which this was 2001, so they weren't as progressed as they are now. And a lot of them were just kinda giving different contradictory information. So I felt like an absolute mess. I did not know what I was doing. And I definitely did not get at all the emotional support piece. In my
Mm,
mind, it was like you create a structured environment, you send them to the right school, you feed them a really healthy diet. I was a stay-at-home mom, and you just kind of put all these things to the recipe, and everything works out. But my kids were really lacking in emotional support until I went a little bit before going back to grad school. I started discovering work on self-compassion, and that was a real shift for me, and then from there, that got me into attachment theory, and, before that, I started, doing more of that attachment parenting style, which seemed to be very helpful for me as far as bonding. But,
mm,
my kids are all they're 12 to 22, so teenage,
mm,
young preteen to young adolescent. And I just, the relationship that I have with my children is profoundly healthy. It is probably the biggest achievement I think of my life is what I have been able to create with my kids. I have it down. I know how to be emotionally supportive. I know how to be validating. I know how to get them to understand themselves on a deeper level. And for anyone out there who, has kids that you have had strained relationships with, or you feel guilty because you hear all this attachment information and we're always sort of blaming the parents, right? There is a way to turn it around. Just keep going with this information. Keep going with learning. Truly, it all boils down to learning how to be emotionally supportive.
mm. Yeah.
And I hope I answered your question.
Yeah,
Uh,
no, absolutely. It's funny. I wanted to ask you because people have been asking me, and while I have my ideas about how I plan to approach parenting,
mhm,
knowing what I know about this work, I'm also very ready to be humbled because I think that
mhm. Yeah, you will.
going
Yeah.
into it, like ideals are one thing, and I'm sure the reality of it will be challenging and beautiful and surprising in so many ways. Something
It
that I
is.
keep. Sorry, you
Go
go.
ahead. No, no, go ahead. I
Oh,
forgot what
I
I
was
was
gonna
gonna
say
say.
something that I keep coming back to for myself is like, safety, factual safety versus the perception of safety. And I think for, babies, infants, children,
Mhm,
like the perception of safety, and frankly, adults, is so much more like rich and important in
mhm,
having that really felt sense of security. But I think so much kind
mhm.
of more traditional parenting stuff is just about like, is the baby factually safe, right? Do they have their
Oh, sure,
physical
right.
needs met rather
Very
than
logistic.
all of that
Yeah.
emotional nurturance and validation, which is like, do you feel that? Do you perceive yourself to be safe?
Mhm,
And really leading with like, what would a child be wanting from me in order to
mhm.
feel safe in this moment with whatever behavior they're presenting, I think is a really helpful kind of north star on a lot of decisions around that.
It's so true. I mean, we really do need to put emotions first, and I think in this culture, we're putting achievements first, we're putting school first, we're putting sports first, and even maybe
Mm,
physical health sometimes first, which is, as we know, all those things are wonderful and important, but what needs to happen first is emotional safety, truly.
mm,
Um,
yeah.
the parents that I've worked with, throughout the years that have become parents as we're doing this work or after they've done all this work, uh, just there goes my blanket. I have seen them be very successful from day one.
Mm,
So
yeah.
there is hope, so much. I just want to reassure
Mm.
you that what I see is that people who are going into parenting doing this work, that the experience is just so pleasurable for them because they
Mm.
get to feel so successful. And it, for me, when I was had my first, I was learning, oh, you have to let them cry it out. They've got to be on this sleep schedule. I mean, to this day, I have PTSD symptoms around listening to my son cry. I just horrible
Yeah.
memories. But and with my third, I learned this attachment parenting where I was carrying her in a sling and sleeping with her. And to me, that was a beautiful experience. Not that everybody needs to
Yeah.
take it that far, but for me, that way of living was far less exhausting than the
Yeah.
other way. I was getting sleep at night. I felt
Yeah.
a felt sense of everything just felt safe and right.
Yeah.
Um, and then are you familiar with Gabor Mate?
Yes.
Okay, so have you read his book on ADD,
No, I
Scattered?
haven't.
Okay, well,
I
there's a chapter in this book at the kind of near the end about parenting, and it feels a little, I don't know if I wanna say random, but it's a parenting style that he's bringing to life and describing that
mm.
is exactly the way I've learned to parent.
Yeah.
And whenever he's describing it in this book, in this ADD book, which it doesn't have to be about ADD at all, it just, to me, that's the way to go, is that chapter of
Yeah.
the Mate book, and I have seen that way of being with children be so successful.
Yeah, I a lot of his stuff around parenting really resonates. He has
Mhm.
a section in his newest book, The Myth of Normal, around parenting, and there's another one, Hold On to Your Kids, which he co-wrote
Oh,
with
well, then
another
he has
guy,
other
which
stuff
is
that's more direct, okay.
yeah, well, no, it's
Yeah,
he's so prolific that he really covers such a broad
sure.
scope. But yeah, a lot of his stuff is really makes a lot of sense to me, and everything you
Well,
describe is
you're
sort of
gonna be fine if you're already
Here's
trusting
hoping again.
yeah,
I'm very ready to be humbled, but
yeah,
I'm feeling better prepared than I certainly would have been without all of this work. And yeah,
sure.
no, it's an exciting time. Julie, where can people find you? I suspect a lot of people listening will already be familiar with you, but for those who aren't, what's the best way for them to engage more deeply with your work and stay connected with you?
Well, my home base, because this is where I kinda started putting this information out, is my Instagram account, which is at The Secure Relationship. I also have a website where, you can go to just see my podcast that I've done, not mine, but guests appeared
Mm.
on. That is where you'll find links to the book. I do have a team of therapists working for me, coaches actually, that work all over the globe. And then my book, Secure Love, which is now out, not as I speak, but when this airs, you can find it anywhere. It's, all over the world. I o you different lots of different places, but I always say, "Well, just go to Amazon," and that seems
Yeah,
like an easy
yeah,
one. So yeah, Secure Love by Julie
amazing.
Mennano. I'm really proud, really proud. I really think I've put something together that is gonna really have a lot to give to the world, and that feels really good for me. But if you
Mm.
don't wanna buy the book, definitely go to my Instagram account because all of the information is there. I mean, it's disjointed, it's not as organized, but as my posts are very lengthy, very much in depth. So, Instagram account is an actual book if you don't mind picking
Mm.
around a lot and reading the same thing over and over.
Thanks, Julie. We'll link all of that in the show notes. And
Okay.
absolutely, I think your Instagram is invaluable, but I also very much look forward to receiving a copy of the book.
Well,
Julie,
great.
thank you so, so much for a beautiful conversation. It's been very insightful and I'm sure will be hugely valuable to everyone who is listening.
All right. Well, great. Thanks for having me. And congratulations. And I'm so excited for you.
Thank you.